The mountains of Montana held their secrets close in the hours before dawn. Jack Rearden stood on his porch at 5 in the morning, coffee steaming in the cold air, watching the sun paint the peaks in shades of amber and gold. 64 years on this earth, 45 of them in uniform, 2 years retired. And still, every morning, he woke to the sound of helicopters that existed only in his memory. The cabin behind him was small, functional, a place where a man could live quietly and bother no one. Wood floors that creaked in the right places, a fireplace that drew smoke properly, windows that looked out on wilderness instead of war. This was supposed to be peace. This was supposed to be enough. But peace, Jack had learned, was not the absence of war. It was the presence of something worth protecting. And he had spent so long protecting strangers that he had forgotten how to protect what mattered. He drank his coffee black, no sugar, the same way he had drunk it in the Mekong Delta in 1969 when he was 19 years old and the world was on fire. The same way he had drunk it in 100 forward operating bases across a dozen countries. Some habits did not break. Some memories did not fade. His hand shook slightly as he raised the cup to his lips. Not from fear, not from cold, from time, from age, from the slow betrayal of a body that had carried him through more than anybody should have to carry. The doctors called it essential tremor. Jack called it the price of admission. He finished his coffee and went inside to change into running gear. 5 miles every morning, rain or shine, snow or heat. This was discipline. This was the only religion he still practiced. The trail behind his cabin wound through pine forest and open meadow. His breath came harder than it used to. His knees protested on the downhills, but his pace was steady, relentless. The same way he had moved through rice paddies and mountain passes, the same way he had carried wounded men to safety. Slow and steady wins the race. Slow and steady keeps you alive. At the turnaround point, 3 miles out, Jack stopped to catch his breath. Below him, the valley spread out like a painting. Whitefish, Montana, population 8,000, a place where people knew your name but did not ask too many questions. A place where a man could volunteer as a paramedic and feel useful without feeling suffocated by the weight of what he had done. He bent over, hands on knees, and let his heart rate settle. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The breathing techniques they had taught him at Quantico 50 years ago. Everything was training, everything was preparation, even retirement. The run back was always harder. Uphill, into the wind. But Jack did not slow down. Pain was information. Discomfort was temporary. What mattered was finishing what you started. By 7, he was showered and dressed, jeans and a flannel shirt, work boots, the uniform of a civilian. Strange how clothes could feel like a costume when you had spent most of your life in camouflage. His cabin was neat, sparse. A kitchen table with 2 chairs, though only one ever got used. A couch that faced a television he rarely turned on. Bookshelves lined with history and biography. The lives of other men who had fought other wars, seeking answers in their stories that he could not find in his own. On the mantel above the fireplace sat a photograph in a simple frame. Margaret, his wife, 5 years gone. Cancer had taken her while he was deployed to Iraq. He had made it back in time to hold her hand for the last 72 hours. Not enough. Never enough. She had smiled at him through the pain and said it was all right, said she understood. But her eyes had told a different story. Her eyes had asked the question she was too kind to speak aloud. Why did you always choose them over us? Next to Margaret's photo was an empty space where another picture should have been. Jack knew what belonged there. His son, his granddaughter, the family he had lost while he was busy saving everyone else. The phone rang at 8:15. Jack stared at it for 3 rings before answering. Phones in the morning meant bad news. Phones in the morning meant someone was dead or dying or needed something he could not give. He picked up on the 4th ring. The voice on the other end was his son, David, 38 years old, a Marine captain before an IED had ended his career and left him with a limp and a purple heart and a father he could barely stand to talk to. Their conversations were always the same, polite, distant, 2 men circling each other like boxers who had forgotten why they were fighting. David's voice was tight, controlled, the voice of a man who had learned not to show weakness. Emma's birthday is next month. Jack closed his eyes. Emma, 16 years old, his granddaughter, a girl he had seen exactly twice in her entire life. Once at her birth, when he had flown in for 36 hours between deployments. Once at her mother's funeral 3 years ago, when he had stood at the back of the church and left before the reception because he did not know what to say to a grieving child he barely knew. "I'd like to come," Jack said. There was a pause, long enough to hurt. "Would you?" David's voice carried the weight of 16 years of missed birthdays. Of baseball games Jack had promised to attend and never made it to. Of Christmas mornings when the presents had arrived, but the man had not. Or will another mission come up? Another stranger who needs saving more than your own family? Jack sat down at the kitchen table, put his free hand flat against the wood, felt the grain beneath his palm. Solid, real. This was real. This conversation was happening. "That's not fair, son." "Fair," David laughed. It was not a sound that contained any humor. "You want to talk about fair? Mom died while you were in Baghdad. I got blown up in Helmand and you were in the Philippines. Emma asks about you sometimes. Asks why her grandpa doesn't love her. What am I supposed to tell her, that you love the Marine Corps more than you love us? Because that's the truth, isn't it?" Jack felt something crack inside his chest. Something that had been holding together for a very long time. "I love you," he said quietly. "Both of you. I just don't know how to show it. I never learned how to do that part." Another pause, longer this time. "Then maybe it's too late," David said, and hung up. Jack sat at the table for a long time after the dial tone stopped. The morning light moved across the floor. The cabin settled around him with small creaks and groans. Outside, birds sang songs that had nothing to do with human pain. He looked at Margaret's photograph, looked at the empty space beside it. "I'm sorry," he said to the silence. "I'm so goddamn sorry." But sorry was just a word. Sorry did not change anything. Sorry did not bring back the years. Sorry did not make him the father he should have been, the grandfather he could have been. Jack stood up and walked to the window, looked out at the mountains. They stood there, permanent, uncaring. They had been there before him, and they would be there after him. What mark would he leave on this world? What legacy beyond a trail of saved strangers in a family that barely knew his name? At 9, his pager went off. Jack Rearden was a volunteer paramedic for the Whitefish Fire Department. 3 shifts a week, enough to stay sharp, enough to feel useful, enough to remember that he still had skills that mattered. The call was for a cardiac event at a farm 8 miles north. Jack grabbed his kit and headed for his truck. An old Ford Ranger, reliable, simple. It started on the first try. The drive took 12 minutes. Jack knew these roads, knew every turn and straightaway. This was his territory now, not the jungles of Southeast Asia or the deserts of the Middle East, just Montana, just home. The farm belonged to the Hendersons, Walt and Mary, in their 70s. Good people who had worked the land for 50 years and planned to die on it. Walt was lying in the driveway when Jack arrived. Mary was kneeling beside him, holding his hand, tears streaming down her face. Jack moved quickly. His hands found their rhythm, the same rhythm they had found on battlefields and in field hospitals and in 1,000 moments when someone's life depended on him, keeping calm and moving fast. Walt's pulse was weak, irregular, classic signs of myocardial infarction. Heart attack. Jack radioed for the ambulance. Started an IV, administered aspirin. His hands shook as he worked, but they did not falter. This was muscle memory. This was what he was born to do. "Stay with me, Walt," Jack said. His voice was steady, calm, the voice he had used with 19-year-old Marines who were bleeding out in his arms. The voice that said everything would be all right even when it wouldn't be, even when you knew damn well it wouldn't be. "You're going to be fine. Just keep breathing, in and out. That's it." Walt's eyes focused on Jack's face. Recognition, trust. This was what Jack lived for. These moments, when his presence meant something, when his skills could tip the scales between life and death. The ambulance arrived in 8 minutes. Jack rode with them to the hospital, stayed until Walt was stabilized, stayed until Mary had someone with her, stayed because that was what you did. You did not leave until the job was done. By the time Jack got back to his cabin, it was past noon. He made a sandwich he did not eat, sat on his porch and watched the shadows lengthen. His phone rang again at 2 in the afternoon. This time Jack knew before he answered that this call would change everything. The voice on the other end was crisp, professional, military. "Colonel Rearden, This is Colonel Patricia Hayes, Pentagon. Jack straightened in his chair. Old habits, old reflexes. When the Pentagon called, you stood at attention even if no one could see you. Ma'am, I'm sorry to disturb your retirement, Colonel, but we have a situation, and we need you. Jack closed his eyes. Of course they did. Of course. What kind of situation? The classified kind. I'm flying to Montana tonight. I'll be at your location at 2200 hours. Tell no one. The line went dead. Jack sat there holding the phone. 2200 hours. 10 p.m. In 8 hours, his quiet retirement would end. In 8 hours, whatever peace he had managed to find would shatter like glass. He should have said no. Should have told them to find someone else. Someone younger. Someone who still had something left to give. But Jack Rearden had never been good at saying no. Not when someone needed him. Not when there was a mission. Not when he could make himself useful one more time. The hours passed slowly. Jack tried to read and could not focus. Tried to watch television and could not sit still. Finally, he went to his bedroom and opened the closet. In the back, in a locked case, his dress uniform hung in plastic. He had not worn it in 2 years. Had not wanted to. Next to it, his medals in a felt-lined box. Silver Star, Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart with 2 oak leaf clusters, Navy Cross, 45 years of service reduced to pieces of metal and ribbon. Jack closed the closet. He was not that man anymore. Could not be that man anymore. At exactly 10 p.m., headlights turned into his driveway. A black SUV with government plates. Jack watched from his window as a woman in uniform stepped out. She moved with purpose, with authority. She knocked once on his door. Jack opened it. Colonel Patricia Hayes was in her mid-50s. Lean, sharp-eyed. Her uniform was immaculate. Her bearing was that of someone who had earned every star she wore through blood and competence. Colonel Rearden, Colonel Hayes. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Jack closed the door behind her. Hayes did not waste time on pleasantries. She set her a briefcase on the table and pulled out a tablet, pulled up a file, turned it to face Jack. The screen showed a photograph. A young woman in combat fatigues, 29 years old, Korean-American, serious eyes, a medic's cross on her collar. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, Hayes said, combat medic, attached to Delta Force, 4th Special Forces Group, 2 tours in Afghanistan, exemplary record, recommended for promotion. Jack studied the photograph. Something about the woman looked familiar, something in her eyes. 3 weeks ago, her unit was on a routine patrol in Kandahar province. They were ambushed, sustained heavy casualties. In the chaos, Lieutenant Kim was separated from her unit. When the dust cleared, she was missing. Jack looked up. MIA? KIA, Hayes said. The words landed hard. Killed in action, body not recovered. Her commanding officer, Major Tom Brennan, filed the report, stated that he confirmed her death before evacuating the position. Case closed. Jack waited. There was more. There was always more. Hayes pulled up another file. This one showed satellite imagery, thermal signatures, radio intercepts. 2 days ago, we received intelligence suggesting Lieutenant Kim may be alive. Intercepted communications mentioned a white woman moving through the mountains. Locals have reported seeing someone matching her description. If she's alive, Colonel, she's been surviving in hostile territory for 3 weeks. Alone. Jack felt his pulse quicken. 3 weeks. No backup. No support. If she was still alive, she was either the luckiest person on Earth or the toughest. You said her CO declared her KIA. If she's alive, that means he left her behind. Hayes nodded slowly. That's the problem. Major Brennan's report stated he confirmed her death. But our analysts reviewed the helmet cam footage from the incident. It's grainy, dark, but there's a moment when Lieutenant Kim is visible on the ground. And Colonel, her hand moved. She was alive when they evacuated. The air in the room changed, became heavier, colder. He left her, Jack said quietly. He knew she was alive, and he left her anyway. We don't know what he knew, but yes, that's the concern. Jack stood and walked to the window, looked out at the darkness, saw his own reflection in the glass. An old man, a tired man, a man who had spent his whole life fighting and had nothing to show for it but an empty cabin and a son who could not stand to talk to him. Why are you telling me this? Because you trained Lieutenant Kim, Colonel, 2 years ago at Quantico, Advanced Combat Medicine course. She wrote about you in her evaluations, said you were the best teacher she ever had, said you taught her that a medic's first duty is to survive, because you can't save anyone if you're dead. Jack remembered now. Remembered a serious young woman who asked better questions than most of her instructors, who had steady hands and a sharp mind, who had reminded him just a little of himself at that age. If she's alive, Jack said, she's doing what I taught her. Surviving, evading, waiting for extraction. That's what we hope. But Colonel, there's another problem. Hayes pulled up a new file. This one showed a man in his late 40s. Strong jaw, cold eyes, major's insignia. Major Thomas Brennan, Lieutenant Kim's commanding officer, the man who left her behind. Jack stared at the photograph, felt something cold move through his chest. He knew that face. Tom, he whispered. Hayes looked at him sharply. You know him? I know him. Jack's voice was hollow. His father was my best friend. We served together in Vietnam. He was killed at Khe Sanh in '70, just after Tom was born. I promised him I'd look after his son. I've known Tom his entire life. I mentored him through OCS, recommended him for special forces. I taught him everything he knows. The room was silent. Then you understand, Hayes said quietly, why we need you. If Lieutenant Kim is alive, she won't trust anyone. But she'll trust you. And if Major Brennan left her behind, we need to know why. We need to know if this was an error in judgment or something else. What do you mean, something else? Hayes closed the tablet, met Jack's eyes. Lieutenant Kim was investigating supply discrepancies before the ambush. Missing medical supplies, ammunition that didn't match inventory records. She had raised concerns with her unit. The ambush happened 48 hours after she filed her report. It's possible, Colonel, that it wasn't an ambush at all. It's possible it was a hit. Jack felt the weight of 50 years settle on his shoulders. Felt every scar, every wound, every choice he had made and every price he had paid. Tom Brennan, the boy whose father had died before he could hold him. The infant Jack had promised to watch over. The man Jack had shaped. The officer he had trusted. And now possibly a traitor. Possibly a murderer. What do you want me to do? We want you to go to Afghanistan. We want you to find Lieutenant Kim. And we want you to find out the truth about what happened. You're retired. You're a civilian. You have cover. And more importantly, you have the one thing we can't give anyone else. You have Tom Brennan's trust. He won't see you coming. Jack turned back to the window, looked at his reflection, saw the old man he had become, saw the young man he used to be, saw all the ghosts standing between them. David's voice echoed in his memory. Another mission, another stranger who needs saving more than your own family. Emma's birthday was the next month. He had promised to be there, had promised to try. But a woman was out there, a woman he had trained, a woman who had trusted what he taught her and was now alone in enemy territory because someone had betrayed her. Just like Vietnam, just like Lynn. Jack closed his eyes and he was 19 again. He was in the jungle. He was holding a dying Marine in one arm and reaching for a Vietnamese boy with the other. He was making the choice that had defined his entire life. He had chosen the Marine, had left the boy, had carried that decision for 50 years like a stone in his chest. The boy's name had been Line, 12 years old, an interpreter, a kid who had smiled and tried to teach Jack Vietnamese and had died alone because Jack had followed orders, had done his duty, had saved the life he was supposed to save and let the other one go. Never again, Jack had promised himself. Never again would he leave someone behind. But he had, over and over. He had left Margaret, had left David, had left Emma, had left everyone who mattered because there was always another mission, always another stranger, always another chance to save someone else and lose himself a little more. When do I leave? Jack heard himself say. Hayes allowed herself a small smile. 0600 tomorrow. Wheels up from Malmstrom. You'll be briefed en route. She handed him a folder. Classified documents, mission parameters, rules of engagement. One more thing, Colonel. Major Brennan is still in theater. He's at Fort Bragg right now, but he returns to Afghanistan in 72 hours. You'll need to be inserted before he gets back. And Colonel, be careful. If he's dirty, if he really did leave Lieutenant Kim to die, then he's already killed once to protect his secret. He won't hesitate to do it again, even if it's you. Hayes left the way she had come. Quickly, quietly. The SUV pulled out of the driveway and disappeared into the night. Jack stood in his empty cabin and looked at the folder in his hands. Looked at his phone. Should call David. Should tell him the birthday was off. That something had come up. That it would have to wait. But he knew what David would say. Knew how it would sound. Another broken promise. Another choice. Another moment when Jack Rearden picked the mission over his family. Jack set the phone down without dialing. Some promises you keep, some promises you break. And sometimes you break them for reasons that seem like they should matter. That should count for something. He went to his bedroom and packed. Light, efficient, the way he had packed 1,000 times before. He moved through the motions without thinking. This was automatic. This was who he was. Before he turned off the light, Jack looked at Margaret's photograph one more time. "I'm sorry," he said again, "but there's someone out there, someone who needs help, someone I taught. I can't leave her, not this time." Margaret's face smiled back at him. Forever young, forever understanding, forever waiting for a man who would never come home. Jack turned off the light and lay down in the darkness. Tomorrow he would put on a uniform again. Tomorrow he would become the Colonel Jack Rearden again. Tomorrow he would go back to war. But tonight, just for a few hours, he was only a man. An old man, a tired man, a man who had made all the wrong choices for all the right reasons and could not figure out where he had lost his way. Sleep came slowly, and when it came, it brought dreams of jungles and helicopters in the face of a boy named Lynn, who died because Jack had followed orders. At 5 a.m., Jack woke, did not run, did not make coffee, just dressed and drove to Malmstrom Air Force Base in the pre-dawn darkness. The C-17 was waiting on the tarmac. Jack showed his orders to the security checkpoint. They waved him through. Inside of the cargo hold, a dozen soldiers sat in jump seats. Young, hard. The kind of men Jack had commanded his entire life. They looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and respect. An old man in civilian clothes climbing into a military transport. This was unusual. This meant something. Colonel Hayes was already aboard. She handed Jack a tablet. "Background files on the team you'll be working with. Delta operators. The best we have. They know you're coming. They know you're calling the shots. But Colonel, they're young. To them, Vietnam is ancient history. They won't understand why you care so much about one MIA. You'll need to make them care." Jack nodded and took the tablet, looked at the faces on the screen. Boys. They were all boys to him now. Boys who thought they were men because they could shoot straight and follow orders. He had been that boy once, 50 years ago, a lifetime ago. The C-17's engines roared to life. The cargo door closed. The plane began to taxi. Jack strapped himself into a jump seat and closed his eyes. Felt the acceleration. Felt the wheels leave the ground. Felt gravity pull at him as the plane climbed. This was the point of no return. This was the moment when everything changed. Below him, Montana fell away. His cabin, his quiet life, the peace he had been trying to build. All of it shrinking until it disappeared. Ahead of him, Afghanistan. War, dust and blood and heat. And somewhere out there, a woman named Sarah Kim, who was either already dead or fighting to stay alive. And Tom Brennan, the boy whose father never got to see him take his first steps. The infant Jack had cradled at his best friend's funeral. The man Jack had made. The officer who had maybe, possibly, probably left a soldier to die. Jack opened his eyes and looked at the young soldiers around him. They were checking weapons, running final equipment checks, getting their minds ready for whatever came next. He envied them, envied their certainty, their youth, their belief that the world was a simple place where good guys and bad guys were easy to tell apart. Jack knew better. Jack knew that good men did terrible things for reasons they convinced themselves were noble. Knew that sometimes the monster wasn't hiding in the shadows. Sometimes the monster was the man in the mirror. The flight would take 16 hours, with refueling stops in Germany and Qatar. Plenty of time to think. Plenty of time to remember. Plenty of time to wonder if this was the mission that would finally break him. But Jack had stopped worrying about breaking a long time ago. He had broken in Vietnam, had broken 100 times since. What mattered was getting back up. What mattered was finishing the mission. Somewhere over the Atlantic, Jack pulled out the file on Sarah Kim, read her service record, her evaluations, her commendations. She had joined the Army at 22, put herself through medical school on an ROTC scholarship. Could have been a doctor, could have had a safe career. Instead, she had volunteered for combat medicine, had deployed twice, had saved lives under fire. In her last evaluation, her commanding officer had written, "Lieutenant Kim possesses exceptional skill and courage. She treats every casualty as if they were family. Highest recommendation for promotion and continued service." The commanding officer who had written that evaluation was Major Tom Brennan. The man who had left her to die. Jack closed the file and leaned his head back against the cold metal of the plane, closed his eyes. But sleep would not come, only memories, only ghosts. Lynn's face, Margaret's face, David's face, all of them asking the same question. Was it worth it, Jack? Was any of it worth it? The plane flew on through the darkness, carrying an old soldier back to war, carrying him toward a reckoning he could not avoid, carrying him toward the truth about what he had created when he had taught Tom Brennan to be a Marine. And somewhere below, in mountains and deserts he could not yet see, Sarah Kim was either alive or dead, was either waiting for rescue or already past saving. Jack would find out which. Jack would bring her home or bring back her body. Jack would do what he had always done. He would complete the mission. Even if it killed him, even if it cost him everything, even if, when it was over, he had nothing left but the knowledge that he had done his duty one last time. The engines droned on. The soldiers around him dozed. The miles passed beneath them. And Jack Rearden, 64 years old, 2 years retired, sat in the darkness of a cargo plane and prepared to become a warrior again. Because that was what he was. That was all he had ever been. And that was all he would ever be until the day he died. A man who saved strangers and lost everything that mattered. A man who kept going anyway. A man who had one last mission to complete, one last chance to get it right, one last soldier to bring home. The plane crossed into European airspace as dawn broke somewhere below the clouds. Jack opened his eyes and looked at the soldiers around him. So young, so certain, so ready for whatever came next. He hoped they were ready, hoped they understood what they were getting into. Hoped they knew that sometimes the enemy wasn't the man shooting at you. Sometimes the enemy was the man standing right beside you. Fort Bragg would be their first stop. Jack would meet the team, would brief them on the mission, and would come face to face with Tom Brennan for the first time in 3 years. The boy he had raised, the man he had mentored, the officer he had trusted, the betrayer. Jack did not know what he would say when they met. Did not know if he would see guilt or innocence in Tom's eyes. Did not know if the man he had known for 49 years was still in there, or if something else had taken his place. But Jack knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would find Sarah Kim. He would bring her home, and he would learn the truth about what had happened in Kandahar province 3 weeks ago. No matter what it cost, no matter who it destroyed, no matter how many ghosts he had to face. This was his last mission, his last chance, his last opportunity to prove that some things mattered more than duty, more than orders, more than the mission. Some things like honor, like loyalty, like the promise that no one gets left behind. Jack had broken that promise once. In Vietnam, with Lynn, had carried the guilt for 50 years. He would not break it again. Not this time. Not ever again. The plane flew on toward Fort Bragg, toward Afghanistan, toward the truth. And Jack Rearden, the last good man in a world gone gray, prepared himself for whatever came next. Because that was what good men did. They kept going. They kept fighting. They kept trying to do the right thing, even when the right thing was impossible to see. And sometimes, if they were very lucky and very brave, they found a way to save one more life before their time ran out. Jack closed his eyes and saw Sarah Kim's face from her file photo, saw her serious eyes, her determined expression. Hang on, he thought, just hang on a little longer. I'm coming. I won't leave you behind. The engines roared, the plane flew, and an old soldier went to war one last time. For honor, for duty, for redemption, for the chance to prove that some promises are worth keeping, no matter the cost. Fort Bragg looked exactly as Jack remembered it. Red brick buildings that had stood since the Second World War. Parade grounds where generations of soldiers had learned to march in formation. The smell of cut grass and gun oil and history. This place had shaped him, had made him, and now he was back, walking these grounds as a stranger in his own story. The C-17 had touched down at 0600. Jack had stepped onto the tarmac, feeling every one of his 64 years. The young soldiers around him moved with the easy grace of men whose bodies had not yet learned to betray them. Jack moved carefully, deliberately. His knees ached from sitting too long. His back protested the weight of his pack. But he kept his face neutral, showed nothing. This was pride. This was vanity. This was an old man refusing to admit what time had done to him. Colonel Hayes met him at the hangar. She had changed into fresh fatigues, looked like she had slept on the plane. Probably had. That was a skill you learned. Sleep when you could. Stay sharp when it mattered. She handed Jack a folder. Your team is assembled in briefing room 3, 6 operators, all Delta, all volunteers. They know the mission parameters. They don't know about Major Brennan yet. I'm leaving that to you. Jack took the folder. When do I see Tom? 1600 hours, his office. I've arranged it as a courtesy call. Old mentor visiting his protege. He doesn't know you're leading the mission to find Lieutenant Kim. As far as he's aware, you're just passing through on your way to a consulting job in Kabul. Does he know about the intercepts? That we think Kim might be alive? Hayes shook her head. Need to know. And right now, he doesn't need to know. We want to see his reaction when you tell him you're going after her. Watch his eyes, Colonel. See if he's scared or surprised or guilty. See if he's the man you think he is or something else entirely. Jack nodded. Felt the weight of what was coming settle on his shoulders like a rucksack loaded with stones. He found briefing room 3 in the Special Operations Command building. The room was small, windowless, a projector screen on one wall, 6 men in fatigue sitting at a conference table. They stood when Jack entered. Old respect, old discipline, even for a civilian who used to wear the uniform. Jack gestured for them to sit, studied their faces. 5 men in their 30s, 1 in his mid-20s, all of them hard, lean, the kind of men who had seen combat and come back looking for more. The oldest one stood again and extended his hand. Sir, Sergeant Mike Torres, team lead for this operation. Jack shook his hand, felt the calluses, the strength. This was a man who trained hard and fought harder. Torres was Vietnamese-American, square jaw, dark eyes that held something Jack recognized. Respect mixed with curiosity mixed with the weight of something personal. Sergeant, glad to have you. Torres hesitated, then said, Sir, before we begin, I need to tell you something. My father served with you, Vietnam, 1969. ARVN liaison attached to your unit near Khe Sanh. He talked about you my whole life. Said you saved his life 3 times. Said Jack Rearden never left anyone behind. Jack felt something twist in his chest. The past was never past. The past was always right there, waiting to remind you of who you used to be. What was your father's name? Nguyen Van Torres. He took my mother's name when they came to America in '75. You helped get them out during the evacuation. He never forgot that. Jack remembered. Remembered a young ARVN soldier with quick hands and a quicker smile. Remembered pulling him onto a helicopter while Saigon burned. Remembered promising that America would not abandon its allies. A promise that had been broken for so many others. But not for Nguyen, not that time. Your father was a good man, Jack said quietly. A brave man, how is he? Torres' face tightened. He died 6 years ago, cancer. But he lived long enough to see me make sergeant. Long enough to tell me to be like you if I ever had the chance. The room was silent. The other operators watched this exchange with the careful attention of men who understood that they were witnessing something important. Jack cleared his throat, pushed down the emotion. There would be time for that later. Or there wouldn't be. Either way, right now there was work to do. Let's talk about why we're here. He pulled up the first slide. Sarah Kim's photograph. Young, serious, alive. Lieutenant Sarah Kim, combat medic. 29 years old. 3 weeks ago, her unit was ambushed in Kandahar province. She was declared killed in action. Body not recovered. Jack pulled up the next slide. Satellite imagery, thermal signatures. 2 days ago, we received intelligence suggesting she may be alive. If she is, she's been surviving in hostile territory for 3 weeks without support. Our mission is to find her and bring her home. One of the younger operators raised his hand. Sir, if she's been out there that long, what are the chances she's actually alive? No offense, but 3 weeks is a long time. It is, Jack agreed. But Lieutenant Kim was trained by the best. She knows how to survive. She knows how to evade. And she knows that we don't leave our people behind. So until I see a body, I'm operating under the assumption that she's out there waiting for us. He let that sit for a moment. Let them understand what this meant. This was not a body recovery. This was a rescue, and rescue missions required a different kind of belief. Required faith in something you could not prove. Torres spoke up. Sir, what about her CO, Major Brennan? Does he know we're mounting a rescue operation? Here it was, the moment of truth. Jack pulled up Tom's photograph. Let the team see his face. Major Thomas Brennan was Lieutenant Kim's commanding officer. He's the one who filed the KIA report. He's also the reason we're having this conversation. Jack pulled up the helmet cam footage. Grainy, dark, but clear enough. Clear enough to see Sarah Kim on the ground. Clear enough to see her hand move. Clear enough to see Tom Brennan turning away. The room went cold. Major Brennan declared Lieutenant Kim dead without confirming her status. He ordered his unit to evacuate while she was still alive. The question we need to answer is why. Another operator, older with scars on his hands, leaned forward. Are you saying he left her on purpose? That this was intentional? I'm saying we need to find out. Before the ambush, Lieutenant Kim had been investigating supply discrepancies. Missing equipment, ammunition that didn't match inventory. She had raised concerns. 48 hours later, her unit was ambushed. It's possible the ambush wasn't random. It's possible someone wanted her dead. Torres stood up. His face was hard, angry. And you think Major Brennan was that someone? I think we need to consider all possibilities, including that one. The room erupted, 6 operators talking at once. Disbelief, anger, confusion. This was not what they had signed up for. This was not a simple rescue. This was something darker. Something that struck at the heart of everything they believed about the brotherhood of soldiers. About the code that said you never abandon your own. Jack let them talk. Let them process. Then he raised his hand and they fell silent. This was command. This was authority. Even retired, even civilian, Jack Rearden could still quiet a room with a gesture. I know what you're thinking. I know what this looks like. But before we convict Major Brennan in our minds, before we decide he's guilty, we need evidence. We need proof. And most importantly, we need to find Lieutenant Kim, because she's the only one who knows what really happened. Torres sat down slowly. Sir, you know Major Brennan personally, don't you? I heard he's like family to you. Jack met his eyes. He is. His father was my best friend. I've known Tom his entire life. I trained him, mentored him, recommended him for special forces. If he's dirty, if he really did this thing, then part of that is on me. I made him what he is. The weight of that confession hung in the air. So yes, I know him. And that's exactly why I need to look him in the eye and find out the truth. Because if he's guilty, if he really left one of his own to die, then I need to be the one who brings him down. I owe that to his father. I owe that to the Marine Corps. And I owe that to every soldier who trusted that their brothers would never leave them behind. The briefing continued for 2 more hours. Jack laid out the mission plan. Insertion by helicopter into the mountains west of Kandahar. Grid-by-grid search pattern, local intelligence gathering, rules of engagement, contingency plans. The team asked good questions, hard questions. They were professionals. They knew that this mission was not like other missions, knew that they might be going after one of their own, knew that the line between right and wrong might be harder to see than usual. By noon, they were done. The team dispersed to prep gear and run final checks. Jack stood in the empty briefing room and stared at Sarah Kim's photograph on the screen. Hang on, he thought again. Just a little longer, I'm coming. At 1600 hours, Jack walked across the base to the Special Operations Command headquarters. Tom Brennan's office was on the 3rd floor. Corner office, window overlooking the parade ground. The kind of office that told you someone was going places, that someone had a future. Jack stood outside the door for a long moment, tried to prepare himself for whatever came next, tried to remember the boy Tom had been, the man Jack had hoped he would become. He knocked. Come in. Jack opened the door and stepped inside. Tom Brennan stood behind his desk. 49 years old, still fit despite his age. Sharp. The kind of officer who wore command, well, even as the years added lines around his eyes. He smiled when he saw Jack. A genuine smile. Warm. The smile of a man seeing his mentor after too long apart. Uncle Jack. Tom came around the desk with his hand extended. I heard you were on base, but I couldn't believe it. What brings you out of retirement? They shook hands. Jack studied Tom's face, looked for guilt, for fear, for any sign that this man knew what Jack was really here for. He saw nothing, just pleasure, just warmth, just the face of a man happy to see someone he respected. Consulting job in Kabul, Jack said. The lie came easily. 50 years of practice. Thought I'd stop by and see how you were doing. It's been what, 3 years? 3 years. Too long. Tom gestured to the chairs. Sit, please. Coffee? I know you still drink it black. They sat. Tom poured coffee from a pot on the side table, handed Jack a cup. The ritual of it felt normal, felt safe. But Jack could feel the weight of what he knew pressing down on him like a physical force. "How's retirement treating you?" Tom asked. "Montana, right? Mountains and peace and quiet?" "Something like that. Mostly quiet, some days too quiet." Tom nodded. "I can imagine. After a life like yours, sitting still must be hard." "It is, but it's necessary. The body can only take so much." They talked for a few minutes about nothing. About the weather, about changes on the base, about mutual acquaintances and where they had ended up. Surface conversation, safe conversation. The kind of talk that filled space without saying anything real. Finally, Jack set down his coffee cup, met Tom's eyes. "I heard about your operation in Kandahar, the ambush. I'm sorry about your losses." Tom's face shifted, became more serious, more guarded. "Yeah, bad night. We lost 3 good soldiers, including our medic, Lieutenant Kim. Hell of a thing." Jack watched his face carefully. "I knew Lieutenant Kim, trained her at Quantico 2 years ago. She was sharp, capable. It's hard to believe she's gone." Something flickered in Tom's eyes. Too fast to read, there and gone. "She was good," Tom said quietly. "One of the best. But the ambush was overwhelming. RPGs, machine gun fire, mortars. We held out as long as we could, but in the end, we had to evacuate or lose everyone. I confirmed her status before we left. She was gone." Jack leaned forward. "Tom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Are you absolutely certain she was dead when you left?" Tom blinked. "What kind of question is that?" "A simple one. Are you certain?" Tom's face hardened. "Yes, I'm certain. I checked her pulse. I checked her breathing. She was gone, Uncle Jack." "Why are you asking me this?" Jack pulled out his tablet, turned it to face Tom, played the helmet cam footage. Tom watched. His face went pale. When the clip finished, he looked up at Jack with something in his eyes that might have been fear, or might have been anger, or might have been both. "Where did you get that?" "Pentagon. Intelligence analysts have been reviewing the footage." Tom, her hand moved. She was alive. Tom stood up, paced to the window, stood there with his back to Jack. When he spoke, his voice was tight, controlled. "The footage is grainy, dark. What looks like movement could be anything. A nerve reaction, a trick of the light. I was there, Uncle Jack. I saw her with my own eyes. She was dead." "Then why does the Pentagon think she might be alive?" Tom spun around. "What?" "We have intercepts. Reports of a white woman in the mountains. Local intelligence suggesting someone matching Kim's description has been seen. If she's alive, Tom, if she survived that ambush, then you left her. You abandoned one of your own." The words landed like blows. Tom's face went through a dozen emotions in the space of seconds. Shock, denial, fear, anger. "I didn't abandon anyone. I made a tactical decision to save the team. If she's alive, if the intercepts are real, then I made an error in judgment. But I didn't abandon her. I would never do that. You taught me better than that." Jack stood, walked to where Tom stood, looked him in the eye. "I taught you that we don't leave anyone behind. I taught you that you check, that you make sure, that you exhaust every option before you give up on someone. Did you do that, Tom? Did you really check, or did you make a decision and convince yourself it was the right one because it was easier than the alternative?" Tom's jaw clenched. "You're questioning my integrity. I'm questioning your judgment, based on grainy footage and unreliable intelligence, based on the fact that one of your soldiers might be alive and you declared her dead." They stood there. 2 men, 2 generations, mentor and student, father figure and surrogate son, all of it hanging in the balance. Tom looked away first. "What do you want from me, Uncle Jack?" "I want the truth. If you made a mistake, if you misjudged the situation, I can live with that. Mistakes happen in combat, but if there's more to this, if there's something you're not telling me, I need to know. Because I'm going to find her. I'm leading a team into Afghanistan to bring her home. And if she tells me a different story than the one you just told me, then we're going to have a very different conversation." Tom walked back to his desk, sat down heavily, looked older suddenly, tired. "There's nothing else to tell. I did what I thought was right. If I was wrong, I'll have to live with that. But I didn't betray her. I didn't abandon her. I'm a Marine, Uncle Jack, just like you taught me to be." Jack wanted to believe him, wanted to see the boy he had raised instead of the man who might be lying to his face. But 50 years of war had taught him that people lied, that good people lied for bad reasons and bad people lied for worse ones, and that the only way to know the truth was to dig until you found it. "I hope you're right, Tom, for your sake, For your father's sake, for both of our sakes. Jack left the office without another word, walked back across the base feeling heavier than when he had arrived. Tom had looked him in the eye and denied everything, had seemed genuine, had seemed honest. But Jack had seen the fear, had seen the moment when Tom realized that this was not going away, that the past was catching up, that mistakes had consequences. The question was whether those mistakes were innocent or intentional, whether Tom Brennan was a good man who had made a bad call or something darker. Jack would find out, one way or another, in the mountains of Afghanistan, when he found Sarah Kim and heard her story, when the truth could no longer hide behind protocol and excuses in the fog of war. The team flew out at 0200 the next morning, a Black Hawk helicopter cutting through the darkness over the Atlantic and into the combat zone. Jack sat in the crew bay surrounded by young operators checking weapons and running through final gear checks. Torres sat beside him, leaned close to be heard over the rotor noise. "Sir, did you see Major Brennan yesterday?" Jack nodded. "What did he say?" "He said he made the right call, that Lieutenant Kim was dead when he left her." "Do you believe him?" Jack looked out at the darkness rushing past. "I believe he believes it. Whether it's true is another question." "What if it is true? What if we get out there and find out she really is dead?" "Then we bring her home anyway, give her family closure, give her the burial she deserves." "And if she's alive?" "Then we bring her home and find out what really happened and deal with the consequences." Torres was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "My father told me something before he died. He said the hardest part of war isn't the fighting, it's what comes after. It's living with what you did. It's figuring out if you're still the person you thought you were." Jack looked at the young sergeant, saw his father's eyes looking back at him, saw the weight that all soldiers carried. The burden of having seen too much and done too much and trying to figure out how to be human afterward. "Your father was right," Jack said. "The fighting is easy. It's the living that's hard." They landed at Forward Operating Base Chapman in Kandahar Province as the sun rose over the mountains. The base was busy, controlled chaos. Helicopters coming and going, convoys assembling, the machinery of war grinding on the way it always did. Jack and his team were briefed by the local intelligence officer, a captain in his late 20s who looked like he had not slept in a week. He showed them maps, marked areas where the white woman had been reported, drew circles around villages that might have information. "The locals call her the ghost," the captain said. "Some think she's a spirit, others think she's American. No one's gotten close enough to confirm, but the reports are consistent. She's out there, moving through the mountains, avoiding patrols, Taliban and ours." "How long can someone survive out there without resupply?" one of the operators asked. The captain shrugged. "Depends on their training and luck. Water's available if you know where to look. Food is harder. But if she's scavenging from abandoned positions, stealing from locals, she could last months. Question is whether she wants to be found." Jack studied the map. The search area was huge, hundreds of square miles of mountains and valleys. Finding one person in all that terrain would be like finding a needle in a haystack. Unless that person wanted to be found, unless that person was still thinking like a soldier, still following her training. "Where was the ambush?" Jack asked. The captain pointed to a valley on the map. "Here, Kalat Valley, about 40 clicks northwest of here." "And the search patterns since then?" "Standard grid, concentric circles expanding from the ambush site. Nothing so far." Jack traced his finger across the map. Not in circles, in lines, following water sources, following terrain features that provided cover and concealment, following the route he would have taken if he had been left behind and needed to survive. "Here," he said, pointed to a ridgeline 15 clicks west of the ambush site. "This is where I'd go. High ground, good visibility, water source nearby, close enough to watch for rescue, but far enough to stay hidden." Torres looked at the map, nodded slowly. "That's good ground, defensible. We start there?" "We start there." They moved out at first light, 6 operators plus Jack, light and fast, carrying only what they needed. Jack felt his age with every step, felt the weight of his pack, the strain in his legs, the burn in his lungs. But he kept pace, refused to slow down, refused to be the weak link. Torres set the pace, steady, sustainable. They moved through the terrain like water, following the path of least resistance, using the land for cover. This was what Delta did. This was what they had trained for their entire careers. Jack moved with them and felt himself slipping back into old patterns, old rhythms. His body remembered even if his mind tried to forget. This was muscle memory. This was the ghost of the warrior he used to be. They reached the ridgeline by mid-afternoon, set up an observation post in a cluster of rocks that gave them a commanding view of the valley below, broke out spotting scopes and thermal imagers, settled in to wait and watch. This was the hardest part, the waiting, the patience required to let the world reveal its secrets. Young soldiers struggled with this, wanted to move, wanted to act. But older soldiers knew that stillness was its own kind of action. Jack lay prone behind a rock and glassed the valley below. Looked for signs of life, for smoke, for movement, for anything that suggested human presence. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky. The heat was brutal, over 100 degrees. The kind of heat that made you understand why wars in the desert had always been won by the side that could endure suffering better. Then as the sun began to set, Torres whispered, "Contact, 11 o'clock, 200 meters." Jack shifted his scope, scanned the area Torres had indicated, saw nothing at first. Then movement, subtle, a shadow shifting, someone moving with purpose and caution through the rocks below. "I've got eyes on," Jack said quietly. Single individual, moving with tactical discipline. Could be her. They watched. The figure moved closer, stopped, scanned the area. Moved again. This was someone who knew they were being hunted, someone who had learned to survive by being invisible. Jack's heart beat faster. Could it really be this simple? Could they have found her on the first day? The figure moved into a clearing, just for a moment, long enough for Jack to see through his scope. It was her, Sarah Kim, gaunt, filthy, but alive, moving with the careful precision of someone who had been living on the edge for 3 weeks. Her uniform was torn. Her face was hollowed out by hunger and exhaustion, but her eyes were alert, sharp, the eyes of a soldier who had not given up. "That's her," Jack said. "That's Lieutenant Kim." Torres keyed his radio, signaled the rest of the team. "All units, we have positive ID on package. Prepare for contact and extraction." Jack started to stand, to move down the ridge toward her. Then the world exploded. Gunfire erupted from 3 directions at once. Automatic weapons, PKM machine guns. The distinctive crack of AK-47s. The team scattered, found cover, returned fire. Jack hit the ground hard, felt his shoulder scream in protest, rolled behind a rock as bullets chewed the earth where he had been standing. This was an ambush, a coordinated ambush. Someone had known they were coming. Someone had known exactly where they would be. Through the chaos, Jack saw Sarah Kim dive for cover, saw her pull a rifle from somewhere, and return fire with the calm precision of someone who had done this before. She was not panicking, was not freezing. She was fighting. Torres was yelling into his radio, calling for air support, for QRF, for anything that could tip the balance. But help was 40 minutes out. They had to survive 40 minutes against an enemy that had the high ground and the element of surprise. Jack drew a sidearm, a 1911 .45 caliber, old school, the same weapon he had carried in Vietnam. He had never been much of a shooter, but he knew how to aim, and he knew how to breathe, and he knew how to make his shots count. He fired twice, saw a Taliban fighter drop, adjusted, fired again, another one down. Beside him, one of the younger operators took a round to the leg, went down screaming. Jack crawled to him, dragged him behind cover, started first aid even as bullets stitched the ground around them. This was automatic. This was training. You did not think, you just moved. Torres was magnificent, moving through the chaos like a dancer, firing, moving, firing again, his rifle barking in short control bursts, every shot placed with precision. This was a man who had been born to do this, but they were outnumbered, outgunned, and the enemy knew it. Then cutting through the noise of battle, a new sound, the distinctive whoomp, whoomp, whoomp of helicopter rotors, getting closer, fast. Jack looked up, saw a Black Hawk coming in low and fast from the east. Not the QRF. Too soon. This was someone else. The helicopter flared hard, landed 50 meters away in a cloud of dust and rotor wash. The side door slid open, and Jack's world stopped, because stepping out of that helicopter, rifle in hand, moving with the unmistakable limp of an old injury, was David. His son, his boy, here, in Afghanistan, in the middle of a firefight. "David!" Jack screamed. "No, get back!" But David was already moving, already firing, laying down suppressive fire as he moved toward Jack's position. Behind him, two more soldiers emerged from the helicopter, providing cover. David reached Jack's position and dove behind the rocks, looked at his father with eyes that burned with something between fury and terror. "You really thought I'd let you do this alone?" David shouted over the gunfire. "How did you even know where we were?" "Tom called me. Said you were going to get yourself killed. Said if I wanted to say goodbye to my father, I'd better get here fast." Jack felt ice flood his veins. Tom had called David, had told him where they would be, which meant Tom knew about the mission, which meant Tom was involved in this ambush, which meant this was a setup, all of it. Tom had led them here, had called in Taliban fighters to kill them all, including David now, his own surrogate brother. "We need to move," Torres shouted. "They're flanking us." But there was nowhere to move. They were pinned, surrounded. The Taliban fighters were closing in from three sides. Air support was still 30 minutes out. They were going to die here. Then, through the smoke and chaos, Jack saw another figure approaching, walking calmly, deliberately, like he was taking a stroll instead of entering a combat zone. Tom Brennan. Tom walked into the clearing with his hands raised. No weapon visible. His face was a mask, unreadable. "Cease fire," he shouted. "Cease fire, Americans present." The Taliban fighters hesitated, looked at each other, then slowly they lowered their weapons, pulled back into the rocks. This was not the behavior of enemy combatants. This was the behavior of hired guns taking orders. Tom walked forward until he stood in the open ground between Jack's position and where Sarah Kim was hunkered down. He looked at Jack, at David, at the entire team. "Uncle Jack, David, I'm sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry." Jack stood slowly. David grabbed his arm. "Dad, don't. It's a trap." "I know." Jack looked at his son, saw the fear there, the love. "But I need to hear this." Jack walked into the clearing. David followed a step behind. Torres covered them from the rocks. Tom's face was twisted with something Jack had never seen before. Not guilt, not shame, something deeper, something broken. "You were right," Tom said, his voice shook. "About everything. I left Sarah, not by accident, on purpose. She found out about the weapons smuggling, about General Caldwell's operation, about the money, and I was part of it, Uncle Jack. I helped them. I moved the weapons, I took the payments, and when she got too close, I arranged the ambush to kill her." Sarah emerged from her position, rifle trained on Tom. Her face was hard. "You son of a bitch." "I know." Tom didn't look at her, only at Jack. "And when that didn't work, I tried to kill all of you. I called in these fighters. I told them where you'd be. I wanted it to look like Taliban, wanted it to end clean, but then David came. My brother, the boy I grew up with, and I realized I couldn't do it anymore. Couldn't keep being this thing I'd become." David's voice was raw. "Why, Tom, we were family." "Because I was tired." Tom's composure cracked. "Tired of being perfect. Tired of living up to Jack Rearden. Tired of being the son of a dead hero I never knew. You had Jack, David. You had a father who was alive, who came home sometimes. I had nothing but a name on a wall and expectations I could never meet." Jack felt the words hit him like bullets. Because they were true. All true. He had tried to make Tom into a perfect Marine, into a replacement for the friend he had lost. Had never asked what Tom wanted, had never seen how the weight of those expectations was crushing him. "So I took Caldwell's deal," Tom continued. "Started moving weapons, making money, telling myself I deserved it, that the system owed me. And when Sarah found out, I convinced myself she was the problem. Not me, her." Tom pulled something from his pocket, a detonator. Jack tensed. "There are charges buried all around this position," Tom said quietly. "I set them this morning, my escape plan, my way to make sure no one survived to tell the story. I could trigger them right now. Kill all of us. Make it look like an enemy ambush gone wrong." David raised his rifle. Torres did the same. But Tom wasn't looking at them. He was looking at Jack. "But I'm not going to do that. Because you came back for her, Uncle Jack. You did what I couldn't. You kept the promise. And maybe, just maybe, if I do one thing right, my dad won't be ashamed of me." Tom turned the detonator around, pointed it away from Jack's position, toward the rocks where the Taliban fighters were hiding. "Get Sarah. Get out of here. The charges are set to blow toward them, not you. You've got 30 seconds once I trigger this. Move." "Tom, no!" Jack stepped forward. "You can fix this. Turn yourself in. Testify. There's still a way back." Tom smiled. It was Singh. broken but real. There's no way back for me, Uncle Jack, but there's still a way forward for you. Go home. Be the father David needs. The grandfather Emma deserves. Stop being a Marine and start being a man. He looked at David. I'm sorry, brother. Tell Emma her uncle loved her, even though he never got to meet her. Then Tom pressed the button. The world went white, then red, then nothing but noise and heat and the force of the explosion throwing Jack backward. He hit the ground hard, felt David grab him, felt hands pulling him up. Through the smoke and ringing in his ears, Jack saw the rocks where the Taliban fighters had been. Saw nothing but fire and debris. They were gone, dead or scattered. And Tom was at the center of the blast radius, on his knees then falling forward, not moving. Tom, David screamed, started to run toward him. Jack grabbed his son, held him back. He's gone. He's already gone. Torres was pulling them toward the helicopter. Sir, we need to move. Secondary explosions possible. Move! They ran, Jack and David supporting each other. Torres and the team providing cover. Sarah Kim running beside them. All of them moving toward the Black Hawk that was already spooling up its rotors. They climbed aboard. The helicopter lifted off, and as they gained altitude, Jack looked down at the burning rocks below. Tom Brennan lay there, still, small, a man who had carried too much weight for too long and finally found a way to set it down. Jack put his arm around David, felt his son shaking, felt his own tears mixing with the dust on his face. I'm sorry, Jack whispered. To David, to Tom, to everyone he had failed. I'm so sorry. David looked at him, and for the first time in years, Jack saw something other than anger in his son's eyes. Saw grief, saw understanding, saw the beginning of something that might someday become forgiveness. Let's go home, Dad, David said. Let's just go home. The helicopter carried them through the smoke, back to base, back to safety, back to the long process of figuring out what came next. But one thing was certain. Tom Brennan had made his choice, had chosen to save the people he loved, even though it cost him everything. And in that choice, in that final act, he had given Jack a gift. The truth, the evidence, and the reminder that it was never too late to do the right thing, even if the right thing was dying so others could live. The helicopter flew on through the Afghan twilight, carrying the living away from the dead, carrying them toward whatever came next. And Jack Rearden held his son and understood that he had been given something he did not deserve. Another chance, one more opportunity to be the father he should have been all along. Tom had paid for that chance with his life. Jack would not waste it. The flight back to Forward Operating Base Chapman took 40 minutes. No one spoke. The helicopter crew bay was filled with the kind of silence that comes after violence, after loss, after watching someone you knew choose death over dishonor. Jack sat with his arm around David. His son stared straight ahead, not crying anymore, just hollow, processing what he had witnessed, what they had all witnessed. Sarah Kim sat across from them. Her eyes were closed, but Jack could tell she was not sleeping, could see the tension in her jaw, the way her hands gripped her rifle. She had survived 3 weeks alone, had been found, had been betrayed, had watched her betrayer die. That was a lot to carry in one day. Torres sat beside her, professional, alert, but Jack saw him glance at Sarah every few seconds, checking, making sure she was real, that they had actually found her, that this mission had not been for nothing. The base looked the same as when they had left 12 hours ago, but Jack felt different, felt older, felt like something inside him had finally broken in a way that could not be fixed. They landed on the helipad. Medical personnel swarmed Sarah immediately. She tried to wave them off, but they insisted. Protocol. After 3 weeks in the field, she needed to be checked, cleared, made sure she was not carrying diseases or injuries that would kill her now that the adrenaline had worn off. David climbed out of the helicopter and stood on the tarmac, looked lost, like a man who had just watched his world reshape itself and did not know what shape it was taking. Jack put his hand on his shoulder. You shouldn't have come. David looked at him. Yes, I should have. Tom was right. You would have died out there if I hadn't. Maybe, but you could have died too. We're both still here. That's what matters. They stood there, father and son, for the first time in years, standing together instead of apart. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. Colonel Hayes met them in the debriefing room an hour later. She looked at Jack, at David, at Torres. read the exhaustion and grief on their faces. Major Brennan is dead, she said. It was not a question. Yes, ma'am, Jack said. He detonated charges that he had set as part of the ambush. Killed himself and several Taliban fighters. Saved our lives. Hayes made notes on her tablet, and he confessed to leaving Lieutenant Kim, to the weapons smuggling, to all of it. Named General Caldwell as the ringleader. Said he'd been part of the operation for years. Said Sarah discovered it and he tried to have her killed. We're arresting Caldwell tonight. His office, his home, all his accounts. Major Brennan's confession, combined with Lieutenant Kim's testimony, will be enough to bring down the entire network. Jack nodded, felt empty. Tom was dead. The mission was complete. Justice would be served. But it all felt hollow somehow, like they had won something that did not matter and lost something that did. Colonel Rearden, Hayes said quietly, you did good work here. You found Lieutenant Kim. You exposed the conspiracy. You've saved lives. I killed my best friend's son. The words hung in the air, true and terrible. Hayes met his eyes. No, sir, Tom Brennan killed himself. Made that choice. Probably the first truly free choice he's made in years. You can't carry that weight. It's not yours to carry. But Jack knew he would carry it anyway. Would add it to all the other weights he carried. Len, Margaret, the years with David, the lost time with Emma, and now Tom, all of them pressing down, making it harder to breathe, harder to stand. David spoke up. What happens to us now? You're both civilians. You can leave whenever you're ready. Transport back to the States will be available tomorrow morning. David looked at Jack. Tomorrow then? Jack nodded. Tomorrow. They spent that night in temporary quarters on the base. Jack tried to sleep but could not. Kept seeing Tom's face. Kept hearing his voice. I'm tired of being perfect. Tired of living up to Jack Rearden. How many people had Jack broken with his expectations? How many had tried to be what he wanted them to be and shattered under the weight? Around midnight, there was a knock on his door. Jack opened it to find Sarah Kim standing there. She had been cleaned up. Medical evaluation complete. Her arm in a sling from an old injury they had treated. But her eyes were clear, focused. Colonel, can we talk? Jack sat up to side, let her in. She sat in the single chair. Jack sat on the edge of the bed. I wanted to thank you, Sarah said, for coming for me, for not leaving me behind. I made you a promise. At Quantico, I told you I'd never leave one of my students behind. Major Brennan was your student too. Jack flinched. The words were not cruel, just factual, but they cut deep. He was. And he became a traitor, a murderer. But in the end, he saved us. Saved me. The woman he tried to kill. Why do you think he did that? Jack thought about it. About the boy whose father had died before he could know him. About the weight of expectations. About the burden of trying to be someone else's idea of perfect. I think he wanted to be the person he should have been. Just once, before the end. Sarah nodded slowly. I hated him for 3 weeks. Hated him for leaving me. For trying to have me killed. But when he stood there with that detonator, when he chose to save us instead of himself, I felt something else. Something like pity. He was a man who got lost and couldn't find his way back. Until he did. Right at the end. Does that make it better? Does that forgive what he did? No, but it makes him human, and maybe that matters. They sat in silence for a moment. 2 soldiers, 2 survivors. Both trying to make sense of a world that did not make sense. What will you do now? Jack asked. They want me to testify. Against Caldwell. Against the whole network. It's going to be months of depositions and hearings and trials. But I'll do it, because Tom's confession isn't enough. They need someone who saw the operation from the inside. Someone who can connect all the pieces. That's going to be hard, reliving it all. I've survived harder. You taught me that. At Quantico. You said the hardest part isn't the survival. It's what comes after. Learning to live with what happened. Learning to be more than just a survivor. Jack looked at this young woman. This soldier who had endured what should have broken her. And he saw strength there. Purpose. She would be all right. Better than all right. You're going to be fine, Lieutenant. Better than fine. So will you, Colonel. You came back for me. That means something. That means you're still the man you taught us to be. She stood. Saluted. Jack returned it. Thank you, sir, for everything. She left. And Jack sat alone in the temporary quarters and felt something shift inside him. Not healing. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of it. The next morning, Jack and David boarded a C-17 bound for Germany, then the States. Sarah Kim was on the same flight, headed to Walter Reed Medical Center for a full evaluation. She would spend weeks there, regaining the weight she had lost, processing the trauma, preparing for the testimony that would bring down a general and expose corruption that went to the highest levels of the military. Torres and his team stayed behind. They had other missions, other wars to fight. But before Jack left, Torres found him on the tarmac. "Sir, my father would have been proud of what you did, of how you kept your promise." Jack shook his hand. "Your father was a better man than I'll ever be. But thank you for being part of this, for helping me bring her home." "Anytime, Colonel, anytime." The flight home was long. David sat beside Jack. They did not talk much. But the silence was different now. Not the hostile silence of estrangement. The comfortable silence of two people who had been through something together, who had survived together. Somewhere over the Atlantic, David said, "I called Emma, told her we'd be home in 2 days. She wants to meet you." Jack felt his throat tighten. "She does?" "I told her what happened, what you did. She said any grandfather who'd fly halfway around the world to keep a promise can't be all bad." "That's a low bar." "It's a start." They landed at Dover Air Force Base 3 days after leaving Afghanistan. The base commander met them, informed them that General Caldwell had been arrested, that a dozen other officers were in custody, that the weapons smuggling ring had been dismantled, that Tom Brennan's sacrifice had not been in vain. Jack listened to the words and felt nothing. Numb, empty. He had completed the mission, had brought Sarah home, had exposed the conspiracy, but Tom was still dead, and Jack had helped create the circumstances that led to that death. David drove them from Dover to Montana, 2 days on the road, stopping at cheap motels, eating at diners, just being together, learning how to be father and son again. On the second night in a motel outside of Omaha, David asked the question Jack had been dreading. "Do you regret it? Going to Afghanistan?" "If you hadn't, Tom might still be alive." Jack thought about it, really thought about it. "If I hadn't gone, Sarah would be dead, or still out there, still alone, and Tom would still be part of Caldwell's operation. Still living a lie. At least this way, he got a chance to do the right thing. To die as the man he should have been instead of the man he had become." So the mission mattered more than Tom's life. No, Tom's choice mattered. He could have killed us all. Instead, he saved us. That was his decision. His redemption. I can't take that away from him by wishing he'd made a different choice. David was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I think I understand. Tom taught me something today. About how carrying too much weight breaks you. About how sometimes you have to set it down, even if setting it down means dying. I don't want to carry anger anymore, Dad. I don't want to be broken by what you did or didn't do. I want to start over. Is that possible?" Jack looked at his son, saw the grief there, the exhaustion, the hope. "I don't know, but I'd like to try." They arrived in Whitefish on a gray morning in early October. The mountains were dusted with the first snow of the season. The air was cold and clean. Jack's cabin sat empty, waiting, a place that had been a refuge and a prison all at once. David's car pulled up to the diner on Main Street. Jack looked through the window and saw her. Emma, 16 years old, sitting in a booth, looking nervous, looking young. "She's scared," David said. "Scared you won't like her, scared she won't measure up." Jack almost laughed, almost cried. "She thinks she needs to measure up to me? You're a legend to her, the war hero grandfather she never met. It's intimidating." Jack took a breath, opened the car door, walked into the diner on legs that felt like they might not support him. Emma looked up as he approached, stood, awkward, uncertain. Jack looked at her and saw Margaret, saw David, saw himself, saw everything he had been fighting for without knowing it. "Hi, Grandpa," Emma said quietly. Jack opened his arms. Emma hesitated for just a moment, then stepped into them, and Jack held his granddaughter for the first time in 16 years, held her while she cried, while he cried, while David stood beside them with his hand on both their shoulders. "I'm sorry," Jack whispered into Emma's hair. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there, but I'm here now and I'm not leaving, not ever again." They sat in that booth for 3 hours, talking, really talking. Emma told him about school, about her friends, about wanting to be a doctor, about all the questions she had wanted to ask her grandfather but never could. Jack told her stories, not about war, not about missions, about Margaret, about growing up in Tennessee, about learning to fish with his father, about normal things, human things, the things that mattered more than medals and missions ever could. When they finally left the diner, Emma took his hand. 16 years old and still willing to hold her grandfather's hand in public. That meant something. That meant everything. The next weeks became months. Emma came to visit every weekend. Sometimes David came. Sometimes Emma came alone. They hiked in the mountains, fished in the streams, sat on Jack's porch and watched the weather change. Jack taught her first aid, taught her how to start a fire, taught her how to read a map. Not because he wanted her to be a soldier, but because he wanted her to be capable, to be strong, to be able to take care of herself and others. And slowly, carefully, Jack and David rebuilt what had been broken. It was not easy. There were arguments. There were moments when old wounds opened up again. But they kept trying, kept showing up, kept choosing to be father and son instead of strangers. 6 months after Afghanistan, Jack attended the court-martial of General Richard Caldwell. Sarah Kim was the star witness. She sat in the witness chair for 2 days, detailed everything she had discovered, everything Tom had been part of, everything the conspiracy had done. Jack sat in the gallery and watched her, watched this young woman who had survived the unsurvivable, who had come back stronger than before, who was using her pain to create justice. Caldwell was convicted on all counts, sentenced to life in military prison. 12 other officers received sentences ranging from 5 to 25 years. The weapons trafficking ring was dismantled. The investigation led to reforms, to new oversight, to systems designed to prevent this from happening again. Tom Brennan's name was mentioned throughout the trial, not as a hero, not as a villain, as a complicated man who had made terrible choices and one final good one. The Marine Corps did not give him a military funeral, did not honor him, but they did not dishonor him either. His name was recorded with a notation, killed in action, circumstances classified. Jack visited Tom's grave once a year, a simple marker in a military cemetery in North Carolina. He brought flowers, sat for an hour, talked to a man who could not answer back. "I'm sorry I put that weight on you," Jack would say. "I'm sorry I made you think you had to be perfect. I'm sorry I couldn't see what it was doing to you. But Tom, what you did at the end, that mattered. That saved lives. Your father would have been proud. I'm proud. I hope wherever you are, you found peace." At 70, Jack started teaching again. Not at Quantico, at the community college in Kalispell, a class called The Reality of Service. Young people came to hear an old veteran talk about war and peace and the cost of both. Jack did not make himself the hero, did not glorify combat, just told the truth. That war broke people. That service mattered, but so did coming home. That being a good soldier and being a good person were not always the same thing. Emma enrolled in his class during her senior year of high school, sat in the front row, asked hard questions, made him think harder about his answers. At the end of the semester, she told him she had decided. She wanted to join the military, wanted to be a medic like he had been, like Sarah Kim. Jack felt fear and pride war inside him. Why, he asked. "Because you taught me that service matters, but you also taught me to come home. To remember that the people who love you need you more than the mission does. I think I can do both. Serve and stay whole. Can you help me prepare?" Jack pulled her into a hug every day, for as long as you need. Emma enlisted when she turned 18, went to basic training, then to medic school. Jack and David drove across the country to attend her graduation, watched her receive her certification, watched her become a soldier. But this time was different. This time, Jack was not sending someone off and staying behind. This time, he was family. And Emma called every week, came home on every leave, never let the distance become a gulf. She deployed to Afghanistan when she was 20, served with honor, saved lives, and came home after 12 months with stories and scars and the knowledge that she had done something that mattered. When she got back, she sat with Jack on his porch and they talked about what she had seen, what she had done, how it felt to hold someone's life in your hands, how it felt to lose someone despite your best efforts. "I understand you now," Emma said. "Why you did what you did, why you kept going back. It's addictive, feeling like you matter, like your presence makes a difference. But you came home," Jack said. "That's what matters. You remembered that you have a life here, people here. That makes you smarter than I ever was. Or I had a better teacher, someone who showed me the price of forgetting." Jack turned 75, then 76. His body continued its slow betrayal. His hands shook more, his knees hurt worse, but he was present. He was there for every birthday, every holiday, every random Tuesday when David needed to talk or Emma needed advice. He made peace with what he could. Tom's death, Margaret's absence, the years he had lost with his family. He could not change the past, could not undo his mistakes, but he could be present now, could show up, could prove through actions instead of words that he had finally learned what mattered. At 76, the doctors found cancer, aggressive, in his lungs and liver. Legacy of exposure to Agent Orange in Vietnam 50 years ago. They gave him 6 months, maybe a year. Jack took the news calmly. He had lived longer than many of the men he had served with, had gotten to know his granddaughter, had reconciled with his son. That was more than he had any right to expect. David and Emma moved into the cabin with him for those final months, took turns caring for him as he got weaker, as the cancer did what the wars had not been able to do. One evening as the sun set over the mountains, Emma sat beside his bed and held his hand. "Grandpa, I'm scared. I don't want you to go." Jack smiled. His voice was weak, but his words were clear. "I'm not scared, sweetheart. I've lived a good life, made mistakes, but I fixed what I could. I came home. I got to know you. That's more than most men get. What do you want me to remember about you?" Jack thought about that, thought about all the things he had done, all the battles and medals and missions, and realized that none of that was what mattered. "Remember that I loved you, that I loved your father, that I figured it out too late, but I figured it out. Remember that it's never too late to come home, never too late to choose the people who matter over the things that don't." "I'll remember." Jack died 3 days later. Early morning, sun coming through the window, David on one side, Emma on the other. He slipped away quietly, peacefully, a warrior finally at rest. They buried him with full military honors. Flag on the coffin, 21-gun salute, a young Marine playing taps while Emma stood at attention in her uniform, and David cried unashamed beside her. The headstone was simple. Colonel Jack Rearden, beloved father and grandfather, and underneath the words Emma had chosen. He came home. Sarah Kim attended the funeral. She had left the military after her testimony, had gone to medical school, was now a doctor at a VA hospital in Seattle. She stood at the grave and saluted the man who had saved her life, who had taught her to survive, who had kept his promise. Torres came too, still in the Army, now a sergeant major. He brought his 2 sons, told them about the man who had saved their grandfather's life in Vietnam, who had never left anyone behind. 5 years later, Emma Rearden graduated from Officer Candidate School, commissioned as a 2nd lieutenant. Medical Corps. She stood on the parade ground at Fort Benning and took her oath, raised her right hand and swore to support and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. David pinned on her butter bars, stepped back and saluted his daughter. She returned it. Crisp. Perfect. The way Jack had taught her. That night, in her quarters, Emma looked at a photograph. Jack in his dress blues, young and strong and certain. Before the doubts, before the losses, before he learned that strength was not the same as presence. "I promise, Grandpapa," she said to the photograph, "I'll serve with honor, but I'll come home too. I'll remember that the people who love me deserve my time, not just my commitment. I'll learn from your mistakes and your wisdom. I'll be the soldier you taught me to be and the person you wanted me to become." She placed the photograph on her desk next to her medical kit, reminder of where she came from, promise of where she was going. Outside, the sun was setting, another day ending, another beginning. And somewhere in whatever comes after, Jack Rearden rested. His wars finally over, his promises finally kept, his legacy living on in a granddaughter who had learned what it took him a lifetime to understand. That the hardest battle is not the one you fight with weapons. It is the one you fight with yourself. The battle to remain human, to remember what matters, to come home before it is too late. Jack had won that battle, in the end. After all the years, after all the pain, he had won. And that, Emma thought as she looked out at the gathering darkness, was the only victory that truly mattered. The memorial service for Tom Brennan happened on the same day as Jack's funeral. A small gathering at Arlington. No press, no public. Just a few people who had known him before the fall, who could remember the boy he had been instead of the man he had become. David attended, stood at the grave and said goodbye to his surrogate brother. The man who had saved his father's life even as he lost his own. You were always better than you thought you were, David said quietly. I wish you'd known that. I wish someone had told you it was okay to be human, to be flawed, to need help. Maybe things would have been different. But Tom, what you did at the end, that was real. That was true. That was the man you should have been all along. Rest easy, brother. You earned it. Emma visited both graves whenever she could. Jack's in Montana, Tom's in Arlington. She would talk to them both. Tell them about her life, her service, the lessons they had taught her through their mistakes and their triumphs. You were both good men, she would say, broken by the weight you carried. But you taught me that breaking doesn't mean ending, that you can be shattered and still be whole, that redemption is always possible right up until the very end. Thank you for the lessons, for the love, for showing me both what to do and what not to do. I carry you both with me, always. The legacy of Jack Rearden lived on not in medals or monuments, but in the people he had touched, the lives he had saved, the lessons he had learned too late but shared in time to matter. Sarah Kim saved hundreds of lives as a VA doctor, treated veterans with compassion born from understanding what they had endured, what they carried, what they needed to heal. Torres rose to command sergeant major, trained a generation of soldiers in the values Jack had taught him. Never leave anyone behind. Come home alive. Be more than just a warrior. David became a counselor for wounded veterans, helped them navigate the transition from military to civilian life, from warrior to father, from mission to family. He gave them what Jack had finally given him: permission to be human, permission to need help, permission to come home. And Emma served with distinction, deployed 3 times, saved countless lives, and always came home, married a fellow officer, had 2 children, named her son Jack, taught her children about their great-grandfather, about the man who learned to be present, about the warrior who finally found peace. The story of Jack Rearden and Tom Brennan became a cautionary tale in military academies, taught to young officers as a lesson about the danger of impossible expectations, about the importance of balance, about how breaking a man in pursuit of perfection creates tragedy, not heroes. But for those who had known them, who had loved them, the story was simpler. 2 men, 2 generations, both trying to do right, both carrying more than any person should have to carry. One learned to set it down in time. One did not. But both, in the end, found a measure of redemption. And that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. The mountains of Montana held their secrets close. Snow fell on Jack's grave. Wind whispered through the pines. And the cabin where he had finally learned to be home stood empty but not forgotten. Emma brought her children there every summer, taught them to fish in the streams, to hike the trails, to sit on the porch and watch the stars come out. This is where your great-grandfather learned to be happy, she would tell them. This is where he learned that peace isn't about winning wars. It's about knowing when to stop fighting, when to lay down your weapon and pick up your life. Remember that. Always remember that. And they did. They remembered. Generation after generation. The story passed down, the lessons learned, the promise kept. Nobody gets left behind. Not on the battlefield, not in life, not in memory. Jack Rearden came home, and in coming home, he taught everyone who loved him the most important lesson of all: that the hardest journey isn't across oceans or through jungles or into war zones. It's the journey back, to yourself, to your family, to the life you're meant to live instead of the life you thought you had to earn. Jack made that journey, finally, completely. And in making it, he won the only battle that ever truly mattered. The end.